Hello everyone, welcome to this AquaHacking 2020 Challenge Water Issue presentation. My name is Arial Smith. I'm the Coastal and Marine Team Lead at Coastal Action, based out of Lunenburg, Nova Scotia on the South Shore. So to frame this webinar, I really want to provide you the water issue so that we can better understand what we're tackling. How can microplastics from fishing gear, threads, fragments, as well as fibers be prevented from entering aquatic environments? And how can fishing gear be retrieved before furthering the problem of microplastic accumulation? So to give a little bit of background on myself and my research with Coastal Action, we've been focused on this issue for around 5 years and started the Atlantic Canada Microplastic Research Project from 2017, wrapping up this spring. And we're really focused on looking at the quantity and type of microplastics in 3 coastal communities of Atlantic Canada. So you can see here kind of our focus areas, and it's just a baseline look at categorizing microplastics and understanding how many are really out there and how can we best determine source based on these samples. To get a couple of the definitions out of the way, you can see here that there are a few different size classifications. So microplastics itself, standardized across the literature, is seen as less than 5 millimeters in size. And then anything less than that, you really can't detect with the naked eye. So those are called nanoplastics, and they're about less than 1 micrometer. Mesoplastics are 5 to 25 millimeters, and macroplastics are greater than 25 millimeters. So often those are named items or things we can actually point towards and identify. Often they are lobster bands or lobster tags that we can see right away. And the other blurb here just distinguishes between primary and secondary microplastics. What we're going to be discussing are secondary plastics because these are a result of larger plastics breaking down from sun exposure, wave action, and weathering, becoming fragments and foam. We're not as interested in this kind of research for plastics that are manufactured at the tiny size, like microbeads or fibers from synthetic clothing. However, with our research, with the Microplastic Research Project in Atlantic Canada, we have seen those in our samples, and we are categorizing them as such. So as a little bit of a case study, I wanted to show you some of our surface water data. And this gives a great outline of what is being seen in nearshore environments of Atlantic Canada. Right away, we see that threads, and this can be from a variety of different things, but what we notice right away is a lot of these threads are from fishing related activity. So that's around 30% of the samples across all locations, as well as fragments. And fragments could also be from fishing gear. For example, PVC coating on wires, so often traps are coated with plastics as well. So this gives you kind of a good idea of what is the issue and how are fishing related activities contributing to the problem of microplastics. So the big picture. In this left graphic here, we see that marine litter is divided into many different types. So we have plastics from a myriad of different things, but also single-use plastics that contribute to that, and then plastic waste from fishing gear. So around 30% of this marine litter is contributed from fishing gear. And when we're talking about fishing gear, often what is discussed is ghost gear. Ghost gear refers to abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear, and their sources are often sea-based, so commercial and recreational fishing, as well as commercial and recreational boating. Things like threads and microfibers are shedded from gear, both on land and at sea, and we saw that actually firsthand this past September after Hurricane Dorian. So myself and our team were out on the beach going to do some microplastic sampling, but ended up not being able to because of the wind conditions. But right away we noticed there were a lot of rope and fragments from fishing related gear. So a lot of the large entanglements we saw right away, but then there are tiny little fragments scattered around the beach, threads and fibers and fragments from possibly containers and things that would be on a fishing vessel. So when tackling this issue, we need to understand what are some of the issues that fishers are facing and how is ghost gear created. First of all, because we're in Atlantic Canada, we have a lot of unfavorable environmental conditions. So especially for those who are far offshore, and we know that wind and rain and different current conditions can really cause a lot of problems for fishing. There are also gear conflicts that can occur. So that means when gear is intertwined from one vessel to another and often lost in the process. Poor gear condition is also created. So if gear is older or starting to break down, it can snap and then be lost on the sea bottom, as well as illegal discarding at sea. It's important to note that this is one aspect of the issue. However, it's not the whole problem, and it needs to be considered in combination with other issues. So lots of gear is used and not always brought back to shore, but it's important to note that another problem here is the capacity for shoreline disposals. So when fishers come back to the shore, where can they dispose of their gear? And that's an important kind of gap that is missing right now. Fishers often work together to return identifiable gear. So if they're able to, and they can see, oh, this is another fisher's, they're able to pick that up and bring it back to shore. However, there are restrictions in place from Fisheries and Oceans Canada as well regarding that. So what are the problems with microplastics? What are the impacts and how can they be addressed? It's important to note that human health implications are still being studied, as well as some ecosystem problems. So a lot of research is still ongoing and not all the answers are given. And so make sure to keep that in mind as you're addressing the problem. So physical implications can happen for especially tiny little organisms in the marine environment. Fragments can be mistaken for food, and those impacts can move up the food chain. For example, filter feeders may ingest microplastics, and then that could move up the food chain for their prey. Entanglement can also occur, as you can see in this photo, from zooplankton. So a tiny little thread being wrapped around a small organism can also occur. It's kind of like a micro scale of the larger entanglement issue. We noted in the last slide that small organisms can ingest microplastics, and we can actually see that that will biomagnify across the food chain. So it may be a small contaminant level in the zooplankton, but it will increase in the fish and even more so in a seal and possibly even more so in something like a polar bear. So those chemical contaminant levels and toxicity that a microplastic pellet inherently has can actually get worse throughout the food chain. And it's important to note here, microplastics inherently have chemicals because they're oil-based products, but they also have the ability to absorb persistent organic pollutants as they move through a waterway or a near-shore environment. So they can kind of become the super pellet of chemicals, and therefore very toxic to marine ecosystems and marine wildlife. Another chemical implication is bioaccumulation. So over time, the toxicity level of a microplastic may be low in a small fish, but as it grows over time, it actually can get worse. And that is seen in a lot of research looking at the stomach contents of fish, from a small fish to one that is more mature. So what is it we really want to take away from this, and how can we have a lot of innovative solutions that tackle two really big issues? Because we're looking at microplastics and fishing gear and lost discarded fishing gear. I think what's important is not to separate those two issues, but really understand how they interconnect and how important they are to address as a whole. So abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear contribute to around 30% of marine debris, and therefore contribute to a lot of the microplastics we're finding in the marine environment as well. This debris is long lasting and it breaks up, meaning it has the ability to have a large expanse across an environment. It breaks into so many different pieces, creating potential for several impacts to wildlife. And microplastics have a myriad of impacts. So we are still studying some of the human health implications, but we do know there are impacts to marine wildlife habitat, and it's important to keep that in mind when addressing the whole issue. And as we collect more data on the sources and the abundance of microplastics, we need to think critically about innovative solutions that go across issues. So these will be effective in reducing microplastics in nearshore environments from lost and discarded fishing gear. So here are some resources. It's important to kind of look at a variety of different things on a level and also some that are closer to home. So the Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research at Memorial University is a great place to start. We use all of the methods that they've used for our data collection, and Dr. Max LeBron there has a lot of resources on her website. You can also check out our microplastic data, as well as some of the bigger names, NOAA's Marine Debris Program, United Nations Environmental Protection Program, the FAO, and National Geographic. So those are the links that you can check out. And feel free to contact me with any questions you may have. Thank you so much.